Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Econ Playground. I've got with me my friend Puggy Knudson. We met a few summers ago when we were both in the Koch internship program. I think I've got the shirt for that right here. We're in the Koch internship program, and we just spent a lot of time together talking about economics, politics, philosophy, everything that we had in common. So I wanted to have him come on today. He's a philosophy student at University of Minnesota, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and so we're just going to talk about, I guess, a lot of contemporary political philosophy and the things that that Puggy can, educate us about. So, what are the kind of who are your gurus, I guess? And we've talked about the University of Arizona School. Could you tell us a little bit about what their interests are, what kind of research they do there, what kind of philosophies they have?
Yeah. So around the time, like 2016, I started. I originally started my political journey, like doing internships in like my state house at here in Minnesota, the state capital, and then I also did a couple government-related internships at the NIH, and I went over to Washington D.C. And during those internships, I became very enthusiastic about politics and philosophy, but I didn't really know anything particularly about philosophy or politics. I was kind of like 18 years old and new to the whole situation. But eventually, I started learning about the works of Jason Brennan and David Schmitz. Jason Brennan is, in my opinion, one of the best philosophers in the academy right now. Jason Brennan wrote the book called Libertarianism, What Everyone Needs to Know. And that was the first book that really introduced me to the political philosophy in general. And then from there, after reading that book, I expanded over to the University of Arizona in general, the scholars at that school, like David Schmitz, Gerald Gauss, Kevin Vallier, and Christopher Freiman. And I found their works extremely compelling. And the thing I found most compelling about their works was just the interdisciplinary nature of their work. So they focus with a heavy emphasis on philosophy, politics, and economics, PPE. And this is like an interdisciplinary field which draws on topics such as game theory, rational choice theory, axiomatic social choice theory, and different economics. Like you'll see them reference Gary Becker, Vernon L. Smith, famous economists, and you'll hear a lot of economic theory as well as philosophical argumentation to support their defenses of, like say, a liberal society.
And that seems to be something that's different about them. And I think, if I'm correct, David Schmitz is a professor of philosophy and a professor of economics. So, what? Because most philosophers act like they're allergic to economics, or that it's just a utilitarian thing only, or something like that. So, could you tell us a little bit about, or it's almost like you take all the utilitarians and put them in another department and have them just do their own work, and that's what economists are. So what makes them using economics in philosophy different, and what makes it not just utilitarianism? Not that they're totally negative towards that line of thinking, but what makes their approach of mixing those two disciplines unique?
Yeah, I would say that their approach to mixing those two disciplines is unique because it's using a lot of empirical data, and a lot of philosophers sometimes do like armchair theorizing, where they'll try to concoct like idealized versions of the political theory that they want. They'll imagine like utopias or things like that. And what the University of Arizona School is particularly strong in is like taking a couple steps back and looking at the broader picture, looking at the broader philosophical picture, but also incorporating a lot of empirical data to support their arguments. So I think that you need empirical data you need evidence to support your beliefs, and empirical data is probably the strongest evidence you can use to support your beliefs. And that was what I found compelling about their use of that. And I also think that you can't really be an economist without also being a philosopher as well. Like you need some sort of theory of value to talk about utility, and you need some sort of conception of rights to talk about certain things that are right and wrong in economics, or what's the correct action to take. So I think the two are just inevitably, you can't divorce the two. I think you need to be doing political philosophy. You need to be studying economics and things like that.
Yeah, I think that you hinted towards, I think what is called ideal theory or non-ideal theory. Could you tell us what that is a little bit? Because I have a hint of it, that it has something to do with making sure that the things that you recommend are actually possible.
Yeah. So ideal theory, probably the most famous example of the last 40 years is probably or 50 years now, is John Rawls's theory of justice. So in 1974, John Rawls wrote the theory of justice, and then he wrote a couple of other books clarifying that, his position that the main central argument in theory of justice was that if we were to imagine what an ideal society would be like, or if we're trying to imagine what we want for an ideal society, we should start from positions of like the original position and the veil of ignorance. So we should start from a position where we imagine what would it be like if we were in heaven, if we were babies, like deciding what society we're going to be put in. And we would then decide which society we'd like to be placed in based off of the sort of principles that are in those societies. So John Rawls famously leaned heavily on left liberalism. So he concocted a version of the ideal society by saying, well, if an ideal society has enough resources for all people, then it's a society that we should go to. If it's a society that has the difference principle, which says that if the richest people earn enough to give back to the poorest people, that's like the route we should go towards. Like we should allow rich people so long as it provides for the poorest too. So you see a little bit of defensive capitalism there. But the ideal project, or ideal theory in general, is trying to imagine what the ideal society is, and then using that as sort of like a map towards what we should go towards. So if you were to imagine what an ideal society is, then we should work towards that in our regular society and regular politics, which I think is pretty conclusively defeated by what Christopher Freiman wrote recently called, I should get the book, it's a small book, but it's like Ideal Theory, and he wrote a recent book on it.
I can look it up and put it in the description.
Yeah.
And so, and Rawls is usually associated with the left, as you said, but it seems like a lot of the people in the Arizona school, or even a lot of people in contemporary political philosophy, even people more that are libertarian or on the right, see Rawls as like someone that they have to contend with. Like if you don't address Rawls, you didn't do a comprehensive addressing of everybody, right? So he's also kind of like an important figure to them in some sense. Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah. That's cool. And so, appreciating, and I see a lot of appreciating of Rawls, even if there's a lot of disagreement, right?
And I think he is an appreciable philosopher. Like he's someone that we should look at as like a good philosopher. But I do think that a lot of what Rawls was trying to do ended up just finding ways to justify like what he was already believing in. So you could almost say it was like a hypothesis in search of evidence or something like that.
Mm. Yeah, but you can accuse everybody of that.
Yeah, true. We all do that to some extent. I agree.
But okay, could you tell us a little bit more about the Chris Freiman book? And his is NonIdeal Theory, right?
Yeah, NonIdeal Theory. I should get it's a really recent book. I think 2017 or 2018 he wrote it. So in that book, Christopher Freiman shows that if you imagine what ideal theory is and non-ideal theory, and you try to imagine what an ideal theory would look like or versus what a non-ideal theory would look like, there are inevitably features of both an ideal theory and non-ideal theory that the ideal theory wouldn't be able to capture. So if you were to imagine, what John Rawls was doing was he was idealizing multiple parts of society and imagining that they'd be perfect. So he'd be saying that we have perfect rationality when we're in the original position. We have perfect knowledge of what all the societies are like. We have perfect knowledge of what the results of being in a society would be, and so on. Christopher Freiman basically attacks the idea that we can idealize some portions of our theory. So we can idealize certain things like our rationality, our knowledge. We know what goes on in society. He said that we shouldn't really be picking and choosing which things we choose to idealize. Rather, we should just choose to go completely non-ideal, which is the argument he made. So instead of just picking and choosing what things you would have ideal or what things would be perfect, you would say that no, we should go with the entirely non-ideal route. Because inevitably, when you're doing a theory and you're making a model of what a perfect society would be like, you're only picking and choosing certain things that are perfect, and you're making certain things like that are not perfect. Like one of the examples is like we should provide for a police force. Well, in an ideal society, it seems odd. Like there should be no crime. Like if you're in an ideal society, why would you even provide for a police force? And then there's a lot of these inconsistencies, you might say, that are related to what happens when you do ideal theory.
Mm-hmm. So in a sense, you can't have ideal theory because your ideal theory is going to be non-ideal, whatever it is.
Yeah. And if you have a perfectly ideal theory, it's just trivial. It's not even informing you at all.
Yeah, that's a little bit. When we used to talk a lot about. I'm a big fan of pragmatism. I guess if you look at any of the other videos on this channel, there you'll see that. But
Nice. I'm glad to see you're still a fan of that.
yeah, I think that's a little bit what James meant when he said something like the truth is humanistic. In that, if the truth, or a little bit more what he said when he said that the truth is what works. So, an ideal theory, you can, if you can like follow certain logical rules, or you can follow certain principles, or even take some set of empirical data and say, oh well, we know this is ideal or this is ideal in some sense, but none of them are actually ideal or true unless they kind of like land in a dilemma that you're facing right now and tell you, like, because wherever we find ourselves in the world, you hit like some kind of crossroads, like I'm going to take the left-hand path or the right-hand path. And if your theory doesn't actually tell you which path to go down, even if it's true in some other sense, it's not true in the sense that it guides you anywhere. So it might as well not be true. So he never denied anything like there's an external reality to just a person. Like if there were no humans, there would still be something. But he said the truth is humanistic in that the way that we formulate it and describe it, it has to actually like kind of like be a something that you can wield rather than something you can just kind of float around in. Which and then so the more nefarious problem, I guess, would be that if you have something like ideal theory, like John Rawls's ideal theory, that doesn't tell you particularly what to do, but people do act like it does tell you very much particularly what to do, and that it might mislead you by pretending that it's ideal somehow, because then you can't update it in the future, or it's not connected to the real problems that people are facing, or you abstract away a lot of potential real things. And this is probably where how does the economics fit into the non-ideal theory?
Yeah, so if you were doing non-ideal theory, you'd just be doing a lot of, or like in theory maybe, you'd be doing a lot of incorporating a lot of economic arguments into your non-ideal theory to support your idea of what is the just society, or what is a true political philosophy. So like if you were, so like one person who's really good at this is, and consequentialist political philosophy, is Jason Brennan. Jason Brennan, he went a PhD at the University of Arizona. Now he's at Georgetown at the GISME Center, GISME. He is one of the forefront philosophers promoting like consequentialist political philosophy. And what he does is basically non-ideal theory. It's like he theorizes about what is the best consequential actions that we can take in ethics, and also in business, and in political philosophy. And some of his arguments center on the idea that if you like have high taxes, high regulations, you're just naturally going to hurt people more, and it's going to hurt poor people more than you would if you had right, like if you didn't have those things, if you had a laissez-faire economy.
Mm-hmm. And that's it, like even arguing in that sense, like, oh, this is what these policies would do, it's some kind of negative outcome, and we can push negative outcome further. But that seems like what most economists think they're already doing, but sometimes are kind of irreflective about what they actually mean when they say good and bad. Not that they're not right all the time, but that it's kind of irreflective, so you kind of get numb to using those words. So if there's not a good conversation like we're having right now between economics and philosophy, then both sides get kind of numb to how to be good at the other line of thinking. But so could you tell me a little bit more about what some non-ideal theory, how would you approach, like give me an example, I guess, about how you would approach a non-ideal theory and why it's not ideal? What makes it distinct and has to do with the real practical world?
Yeah, I guess a distinctive feature of a non-ideal theory would just be the lack of idealized notions. So you wouldn't have idealized agents imagining what would be perfect for them. You wouldn't have idealized people with perfect rationality. You wouldn't have idealized agents having fully moral. You wouldn't imagine them being fully moral. Instead, you would start from positions saying, well, like we recognize that humans have certain selfish tendencies. Maybe not, they're not entirely selfish. That's certainly a mischaracterization of humans, but humans do have some sort of tendencies like that. Humans are sort of altruist, they're sort of rational, but just starting from basic premises of recognizing what humans actually are.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
Okay, and could you give us an example that Chris Freiman might use of a philosophy that takes that approach?
Yeah, I guess a philosophy that take that approach would probably just be. I mean, I couldn't speak for Chris Freeman, but probably what's going on like with David Schmidt's like his ideas of what using like rational choice theory to imagine how people operate in society, and then from there just naturally projecting what we should do. Like given that people are somewhat altruistic, somewhat rational, somewhat moral, we would use those principles then to say that we should support probably something like University of Arizona classical liberalism or Arizona school liberalism.
Mm-hmm.
But as for like an actual non-ideal project, maybe like you could say like Amartya Sen is doing something like that. Like he's sort of approaching that with his ideas on justice. He's taking real what he assumes are like actual things about facts about humans, and then moving from those facts about humans to a theory of how justice works.
Mm-hmm. And Amartya Sen is usually considered more on the left, slightly even too. So
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And okay, so could you tell us a little bit more of like the content? Like, what are the political or ideas of justice that the Arizona classical liberalism would put forward, and why do they believe them?
Yeah. So you can read Elements of Justice by David Schmitz, which would point out he has like 6 or 7 different categories. I'm just like off the top of my head, one of them is desert. One of them is like justice, and he has these categories of justice, and he moves from these categories of justice to say justice is a map, and that these are like the overall categories that we should be concerned about. But the University of Arizona is kind of disparate with all of their schools of philosophy. So some of them are like Gerald Gauss was a public reason liberal. In the Order of Public Reason, he talked about how if we imagine society, or if we imagine people with full, I shouldn't talk about that, but yeah, just in general, they have different views on what is like the true just society in terms of those different scholars. Like there's different views within the Arizona school, but in general, they're characterized by classical liberalism, libertarianism, and ideas of like having more capitalist systems, but also not really having more just systems that are using classical liberalism as a basis, like Hayek as a basis, but not taking it full force from there.
So it seems like Schmitz has like what he wants to do is have different, not so much first principles, but understand that justice is not like just one thing that you recommend. That would be kind of ideal theory. Non-ideal theory is more like we've arrived at certain things and we want to bring them forward, and they teach us different things, how to go in different directions. Sometimes you might like hit a snag. Oh, we don't know what to do about, I don't know, like abortion. That's one that people debate about because it's not terribly clear to everybody what to do in every circumstance. Whereas something like just murdering an innocent person in the middle of the street, even if somebody can't tell you exactly why that's wrong, there's general agreement that something like that is wrong, right?
Yeah. It was a much better explanation than I just did.
His thing of justice as a map is very cool too. I like that a lot because that's kind of, I think, what the pragmatist angle is that it is practical in that maps you go, okay, I'm here, right, and then I can go here. It's not like you don't just give someone a map and say, okay, this is what you should do, and it's a map of like the other side of the world.
Yes.
You know, it's not helpful to this person.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
And if that's the only true map that you can possibly give them, then that would be saying something like there's no such thing as justice if there is no map. But the idea is that we are building a map, no matter what you say.
And I actually think that a related point to that is in Gerald Gauss's or Jerry Gauss's work, he emphasized a lot about the importance of diversity of opinion in also morality and political philosophy. So one of his central claims was that we kind of need diversity of opinion in moral and political philosophy if we're going to have a functioning good society. Like it could just be that people that are extremely different than us, morality-wise or political-wise, we sort of need them in order to bring a sort of a consensus amongst all people and get a social morality between us. Because if we just had one authoritarian social or political philosophy, we wouldn't have a robust, functioning, good, or like optimal society, you know?
There wouldn't actually be a good way to have a conversation.
Yeah.
It would just be two people saying the same thing over and over again. That would be like a totalitarian society.
Yeah.
That's, I think, one of the things that is different between that people will use words like dictatorship, totalitarian, all to mean the same thing, right? But I think technically they do have slightly different meanings. Dictatorship just means whoever's at the top, their orders go, right? They dictate what happens. And totalitarian means a little bit more specifically that this philosophy or this guiding force has a say over absolutely every single aspect of the society. It's supposed to like be a completely covering set to every single conversation that we have. So even something like a Rothbardian anarcho-capitalism, where this is our one rule, okay, non-aggression principle, and everything else is a version of that one rule, that is actually totalitarian.
Yes.
Because it's supposed to address every single question somehow. Yes. Right?
As an aside, I think Rothbardian anarcho-capitalism is just kind of philosophically bankrupt. I don't find it compelling at all.
Yeah, I think he's an interesting guy, and I liked him a lot when I was younger. But yeah, now I'm not. I know. I agree with you. Yeah.
Like interesting is like it's the same thing as Ayn Rand or whatever. Like I think it's good that we have these people supporting these like really kind of zany political positions, but I don't think that they're like more of an intellectual exercise than actually like we should read them for profit or anything like that. I don't think they're that interesting to read.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about Gerald Gauss, because he unfortunately died earlier this year, but he's probably one of the Arizona School people that I'm most interested in reading, because I'm also really interested in pluralism and diversity of thought as one of the reasons that liberalism is a good idea going forward. So could you, and did he come up with the idea of public reason, or did he take that from someone else? And can you tell us a little bit about what public reason is?
So I don't know exactly the history of public reason. I would say the main person who popularized it was probably Rawls in the 1970s and 80s.
Okay.
But public reason is the idea that in social contract theory, we have contracts between us and the sovereign or individuals, us and other people in society. So if you're building these social contracts, you're kind of submitting some things that you give up, and they submit some things that they give up, and together you all gain in having a society that's more just, more equal, flourishing, or whatever measure you think that society is good on. Gauss's project of public reason liberalism and his idea of the order of public reason was centered on the idea that we could have not one person, no one person or philosopher or king telling us what the true moral or political philosophy is, but rather all of us together in this web of kind of intersubjective beliefs, where we all kind of sort of have some similar beliefs, sort of have different beliefs, but we all operate with a more or less same moral compass. And through this way, none of us has authority over the other person to say, no, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't litter, you shouldn't go kill an innocent man in the street, like you said, or go do anything like that. That he tries to remove the authority position from the philosopher or the king or whatever. Instead, he wants to make the authority that one you have over yourself. So he would like to appeal to your own notion of morality to say, well, you shouldn't litter, or you shouldn't harm thousands of animals through factory farming, on the grounds that you yourself realize that your own morality would demand you of this. So he's appealing to not some sort of abstract notion in the sky saying, well, God tells me this, or God, or this true structure of morality tells me that we should do these actions. Rather, he's appealing to your own actions. He's saying, given your own psychology, given who you are, given your own moral compass, these are the things that you would agree with. And this is why we have a social morality. And this is how we are able to make these demands, these kind of authoritarian demands of each other, saying you should do this or that, or not that, things like that.
So, and then what is the difference then between, and I can kind of maybe guess what it is, but what is the difference between that approach and something like a Kantian approach?
Yeah, so a Kantian approach would probably appeal to like universal opinions, like saying, I'm brushing up on my Kantianism here. If you were an agent and you are, you have, I think it's sort of Kantian. Kant has like a rationalized view of morality. So like if you are rational, then you have you're a full member of the moral status and that you have full moral status, things like that. But I don't know. I guess what would your opinion be on that? Because I'm not as much of a Kant scholar.
I'm not either. I haven't really read any Kant, or I read one essay, but it seems more like if Gauss's position is that you can't have a philosopher just come up with a rule and dictate something, would a Kantian say that some Kantian philosopher somewhere can figure out what all the universally applicable rules are? But why wouldn't you then be able to argue those to everybody? Is there a sense in which Kant thinks that he understands the rules better than anyone on the ground does? And it seems almost a little bit too like Gauss's version is a little bit more contextualizable, right? So when Gauss is arguing to a particular person in a particular place where they should go, where they should move forward, right? Or what they should do in that place. They don't need to appeal to some universal rule. There might be a general universal purpose or some religious idea like that, but it's not necessary to say something like, in all situations, man must do this, blah, 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 like something like that. Yeah. It's more, it's less ideal.
Yeah. Yeah, and if Kant were probably replying to Gerald Gauss's political project, I guess maybe Kant would say something like you, Gerald Gauss, are relying too much on the independent reason of independent people. Like you should more rely on what people would have, that other people would assume that they would have. Like so, for example, like if you were an agent, you should rely on what your expectations are of other people in like universalizing your moral beliefs on other people, instead of saying that you should rely on your own conscience. Like I guess that would probably be my expectation of what Kant would say. But I think Kant's really difficult to read. Personally, I try to stay away from most of that. I truly should read more Kant, but I don't.
I think I'm probably only ever going to read the Metaphysics of Morals, which is I don't even think that long, right? I don't think
the groundwork. Yeah. Yeah.
Good. Okay. What about the more? So then, what kind of practical policies or programs would Gerald Gauss promote, or did he promote to it's the way that I see it is where the economics comes in too, is that what institutions are set up and what the way that people interact with each other gets them, when they do get into these situations where you have to argue to someone's independent moral reasoning, that those independent moral judgments, when they actually happen, are superior. So what institutions did he promote to have a better, the diversity of thought actually like got together better, you know?
Yeah. So the institutions, as like a sort of point to make before that, I would say that Gerald Gauss was very cognizant and aware of his being pigeonholed as either a libertarian or something like that. He did refer to himself as a liberal, but he was made in the preface to or the Order of Public Reason. He has a discussion where he talks about how some people are hedgehogs, some philosophers are hedgehogs, and some philosophers are foxes. This is like an old Isaiah Berlin essay that relates to this, where the idea is that some philosophers know one big thing, like the hedgehog does, and they protect that thing and they champion that thing, whereas there are foxy philosophers who are have many different things and they kind of avoid being characterized by one big idea. Gerald Gauss really wanted to not be characterized by one big idea, kind of. Although he was a liberal, and liberalism, probably what he would have promoted, and if you were to have asked him, probably would have been something like democracy, liberal markets, having lower political interference from lower authoritarian interference from the government, and more a wider sphere of civil liberties for the people. So those are probably the institutions that would have promoted best, like good dialogue, good ideas, like public reason liberalism, like his conception of that.
And how much did they associate themselves, anyone in the Arizona school associate themselves all the way back to people like Smith and Hume, who were like people that were both economists and philosophers before anyone made a difference between the two, right?
Oh, the Smith and Hume are actually central to the University of Arizona School. Gerald Gauss actually was the chair of the new department in moral sciences right before he died. It was started in like 2018. Moral sciences is an idea that was popular in the Scottish Enlightenment in the 1700s with Adam Smith and David Hume. Moral sciences were originally thought of as kind of like what we would now consider philosophy, politics, and economics, where you do social science research, you do economic research, and then including into that, you do moral and political philosophy reasoning to support your arguments about what just society is. So David Hume and Adam Smith were central to and they were actually probably, like, you could consider them descendants of the liberal school that was started in 1776 by Adam Smith.
Mm-hmm. And okay, well, let me go back a little bit back to the pluralism discussion. So, but before we move too far past that, but so I understand in a sense why diversity might, because then it's more of like a dialogue. It's people aren't insulated to a certain set of ideas. They have a wider set of information. We don't need to go into the economics of that because I'm more convinced of that, I guess. But is there any sense that Gauss says there are certain things that we do need to all agree on before we can even enter into this? Something like respect for the Constitution, or like a basic respect that I don't kill you as soon as I disagree with you. Is there any because that's what people would push him on. They would say, how could you say that we have a diversity of opinion on, property, or who the president is, or who has a legitimate use of force? How would he address a question like that over like something really crucial, vital?
Yeah, so he does actually mention some parts about that where, like, in order to be a part of the moral society or like the social morality system, you would have to have some sort of rationality. And I'm assuming, and I think I might be speaking out of pocket here, but I think also a sense of moral intuition and a sense of what you should do intuitively in moral situations. Because I know he disqualifies certain people like psychopaths from being part of the full social morality. So given that his disqualification of psychopaths in that you would sort of say, okay, well, he has some sort of generalized notion that there's rational, moral people. And then from this general notion, he works towards building a social morality, or building an idea of how social morality should go.
But who gets to say who's a psychopath?
Right. Yeah, that's a hard question.
Yeah.
Maybe Gauss was not. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
hard to say.
Yeah, and I think that's another part of where some of the non-ideal stuff comes in, because whatever our theory of the people that we exclude from normal conversation because they're violent or because they're basically necessarily fraudulent or acting in bad faith or malicious or something like that, the way that we arrive at those things is not simply by philosophizing. So and also the idea that, well, and you're familiar with, obviously, as you've been saying, that the philosopher themselves has to be slightly humble. We can't figure out what that dividing line is going to be, especially not here in this 1 hour, but even outside, if we had a whole history of people figuring out who's worthy of thinking or not.
Yeah.
A lot of those decisions are made kind of on the ground and for practical reasons, and that practical reasons are sometimes wiser than the ideal reasons, right?
That's true, yeah. I think in general it's a really thorny issue just to be able to say you are XYZ or you are part of this moral society and things like that. I think that's just in general like a very thorny issue, like how you decide whether or not someone is fully competent or fully rational or is fully able to be part of the moral society. I think that's a very difficult issue.
Yeah. And even if those are like core issues, like things that everyone has to agree on, is there any sense that you have to agree on a larger purpose or something like that of the whole system? Like, would we even act moral in the first place? Is there, and this would be a little bit more, this is what I'm interested in studying in economics and history, is like religious pluralism, right? So is there a sense that if either everybody has to agree on something about religion, or heretics should be, pushed out in some sense on questions of a kind of ultimate purpose? I wouldn't necessarily want to call that religion, but maybe like teleology or ultimate purpose.
Yeah, just a related thought. I sometimes think about how it's interesting that the Catholic Church will have those ideas of how the priests can disagree with other priests, and yet they're still the father of their church. So they have to there's it's a real like philosophical issue where if you have two people saying the moral code says XYZ and one says it's X, one says it's Y, like they're going to disagree about that, yet they're in control of these moral subjects in their church or whatever. I think that's an interesting issue of how you would be able to work that out, of like how would you decide which person is correct given that they're both in the church or whatever, they're both authoritative figures in the moral law.
Yeah, I think that's like particularly one of the issues that I'm interested in, and how like you can say, yeah, like priests disagree all the time. Like the apostles disagreed with one another, right? And but they do have a sense that they go, okay, at the end of the day, even the practical things that we're doing, or prayer, or like worshiping God, is sometimes more important, or the things that we do when we're not thinking are sometimes more important. And usually the set of agreement that is more enforced is like, are they following these particular rules? So that's I think the difference that they make in the church between what a dogma is and a doctrine is. So a dogma is something that if you disagree, they can excommunicate you. But a doctrine is just how people are taught. That's like more malleable policy. And so their understanding is like the dogma helps tie the church together, but not even the dogma. Ultimately, it's God. But not it's the dogma helps us clarify what we actually mean to be a part of the church or not part of the church. So sometimes like really strict dividing lines actually are better for pluralism, because they actually help tell you what's actually going on. Because if we just say, oh, let's pretend we all are somewhere in the middle, or we're all in our own positions, or everybody's an individual doing their own thing, and then we pretend that just means that everybody's still an individual always. But when groups do form and stuff like that, it's a good idea to actually help define where the groups are, because it helps people navigate them and stuff like that.
I mean, it's good. I like that.
Yeah, like baptism is actually like a sign that you actually moved sides on something. Because when you're just a thinker, you can go, oh, I just changed my mind on this. But there's no like official, like you don't have to go to I changed my mind on utilitarianism ceremony or anything.
We should have those. We should celebrate people give up utilitarianism.
Yeah. No, or that's called confession.
Yeah.
But okay, is there anything else you're interested in talking about?
I just want to hear, are you still a pragmatist? And tell me more about your pragmatism. I want
to. Well, yeah, I guess like we just said, I'm not like baptized as a pragmatist.
Yeah.
But I read a lot of James. I'm kind of doing a series on this channel where I'm going through one of his bigger works and doing like a little lecture on each chapter or something like that. And yeah, and I'm interested in reading more Peirce if possible.
Oh, yeah.
Because he apparently had these ideas. I read a book in the fall called The Metaphysical Club, which I've been putting off for a long time, which is like a history of pragmatism. And apparently Peirce had an idea of evolutionary metaphysics, where he thought that kind of laws of physics were more like patterns that evolved out of more of a primordial chaos, and they kind of evolved into something that we call a law because it's a pretty stable pattern, but that at the margins these things can actually change. And he was like a crazy person, literally.
Oh, he was.
Yeah, he had a position. He went to Harvard. I don't know what he got his degree in particularly. I don't think it was a PhD though, because they weren't really handing out PhDs at the time. But he had a position at Johns Hopkins to be a lecturer in philosophy for a few years, and then he got kicked out basically because he might have been cheating on his wife, or he might have been doing these crazy things. And then he was basically like, he almost went homeless a couple times. And but every once in a while, William James, because William James saw Charles Peirce as like one of the guys that inspired many of his ideas, right? And so he ends up inviting him for lectures occasionally and stuff like that. But he had this one essay called Evolutionary Love. And there's a point in the middle of the essay where he says, Lamarckian evolution is evolution by the force of habit. And then immediately after he goes, disregard that sentence. I only wrote it while somebody whose position in society is to annoy other people was bothering me. And so he was like writing his essay, and then somebody bothered him. And then he wrote something like distracted, and then he was like, oh, disregard that, somebody was annoying me. And this got published in the journal. I don't know where it got published. Some big philosophy journal.
I on the point of that evolutionary metaphysics, that sounds really compelling to me. I mean, I tend to think that like most of society, or most of the world, actually, I'm not talking about society, but like the world is probably built up of just fields that kind of emerged. I think all of like protons, electrons, all of that stuff is kind of just emergent from fields, and probably the Big Bang is like some sort of event. Maybe you would say caused by God, or I might say like probably just a random spark that just occurred. But I think that it probably is it evolved like that. I'd say that probably is right. And there's a lot of fine-tuning stuff like with the universe, like weird like Planck's constant. Like why is that there? Why does that show up everywhere? Things like that.
I don't know the actual argument in more detail, but I was actually thinking of I crossed it. It was something I was thinking of doing, because he never really wrote a book, but he had all these different essays, and he wrote tons of notes, and there's still people like sorting through the notes. They probably only got access to them recently, but there's people still sorting through the notes and his letters and stuff like that. And he drew tons of images and stuff. But what was I going to say? Yeah, I was thinking of, apparently there were a set of lectures where he describes his evolutionary metaphysics, and I was thinking of trying to kind of compile them and make it like one PDF document. So if I do that, I'll definitely send it to you.
Dude, what a good project. That'd be a good project for you as a future project.
I mean, it wouldn't be too hard. It would just be read these essays and then combine the PDF.
Yeah.
But I think it'd be kind of fun. And here's another one that I've spent more time with that I can maybe describe better, is one of James's essays, Great Men and Their Environment, which I am thinking of using to kind of describe, because one of the one of the problems in economics that I'm want to research is kind of like, what's more of a driving force in history? Is it more like incentives and like material interests? Does this drive like massive movements and shifts in society, or is it something like ideas that inspire people to go in particular directions, or something like beliefs? And this is usually set up as like two different things opposing each other, but I kind of want to collapse them into each other as like maybe two things that are interacting, but they're always interacting, and the interaction is always what's important. So he has an essay where he's critiquing Herbert Spencer, who a lot of people saw as the main person that brought evolution into the United States, or brought Darwin's ideas into the United States. And so Spencer had these ideas like, oh, well, geography and natural selection, these are always determining where societies are going to go. Or the Greeks ended up this way because of the geography of Greece. Or this ended up this way because of maybe because of physical characteristics. Spencer would argue something like that. And so even our ideas are like epiphenomena of what's going on down here. But James said, first, I don't even think you've got evolution right. So he said, in evolution, it's not one force pushing forward, as if like it's all going in one direction. Yeah. It's actually two forces. It's natural selection and independent variation. The important word being independent. The variation happens independently.
You're right.
So if some mutation is going to happen, let's say there's three possible mutations, A, B, and C, right? And the environment does not necessarily negate all but one, right? The environment might just say something like not B, right? So then it's up to independent variation. Is it going to be A or C, right? So the environment, has a say in what happens. Or if you, in the economics situation, the economy or the material, structure has a say. Matter matters in some sense, at least, right? That's why we call it matter. Yeah. I don't know that people say that all the time about the etymology of the word matter, but I don't know how legit that is. But
yeah, that's interesting.
That But so what happens in independent variation also matters. So he calls it great men and their environment because he's trying to argue that like specific people matter at various times. It matters that it was that guy. It's not just so Spencer will say, if you look back and say, oh, Plato was such a big deal. Plato changed the world, right? And then you go, but it doesn't even matter if it was Plato. It could have been anybody, right? Just kind of the environment had evolved to there was a hole for a guy that looked like Plato, so Plato was going to come along, right? So it was actually the environment that was forcing things in the future. It doesn't actually matter who Plato was. And James is saying, no, that hole is not only one size. Many different things can fit in it, and it matters what fits in it, right? So you can say something like about the Protestant Reformation. Oh, well, the Protestant Reformation was going to happen no matter what because the church was so corrupt, right? Yeah. But it matters that it was Luther, right? It could have been somebody else. He could have had a different idea about the Eucharist, right? He could have had a different idea about this or that, and it would have changed what the Protestant Reformation looked like.
So if I were to characterize what you're saying right now is like, it's not just that it was just inevitable that somebody like Luther would have created Lutheranism or whatever, or Protestant Reformation. It wouldn't have been inevitable that way. We needed somebody like Luther to be able to say those things and do those things, and therefore those things wouldn't have happened without him, or wouldn't have happened at the same time or same rates or whatever.
It's a little bit both, yeah. Or at least that if there's like, if you think of like a whole, like Spencer talks about it as if it's a circular hole, right? That, and you have a square and a circle, and you can't put the square in, but you can put the cylinder in, right?
Yeah.
But it's more like a square hole where you can put the circle in or the square in, and either one. It's just one has to fit in, right? Yeah, something. So Spencer is saying, oh, only one thing. The environment picks what fits, so the environment picks everything. But James is saying the environment picks what fits, sure, but what fits doesn't limit it to only one thing. So he's saying he doesn't even he believed in free will, but he doesn't even say that. He says determinism is not part of this problem here. He says all that matters is that there's kind of two independent things, almost like two people in conversation, right? Like even if we don't believe in free will and both of us are having this conversation totally deterministically, it's still the things that determined you to become you and the things that determined me to become me and how they interact. That's more what he's talking about, is so that you can't say the environment picked what we're going to talk about. It's the environment plus our independent deterministic streams, assuming determinism, and James didn't assume that, but he didn't want to make the free will debate part of this debate. So this is not so much a free will issue, it's more of there's another variable that does matter, and it's the independent variation.
That's actually really compelling. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
I've sometimes thought about whether or not like we would have gotten all of the innovation of the 20th century without like the Einstein creating the special theory of relativity or the general theory. Those are just like, I think that somebody would have figured that out, because it's like clocks must move at different rates if you're going at the speed of light. But like, it's still interesting to think like, well, when would have it happened and who would have discovered it?
Yeah,
I think studies would have been discovered.
I think part of the point too is that history of science and ideas and philosophy works like this too. And so people will talk as if, especially with something like science, like, oh, well, science is going to find the truth no matter what it does. But that's not necessarily true, because it does really matter who discovers it and how they discover it and how they present it, right? Yeah. It's not as if like the truth is like the environment and it selects against false experiments, right? But it does matter what the true experiment that does get done is.
Yeah.
Right? So like Newton, like as if like, oh, Newton was inevitable, or it was inevitable that we would find 3 laws specifically. No, that's really the fact that we say like the 3 laws of motion is really because of the particulars of Newton and what he decided to write. That doesn't make it false either, because people will say, oh my gosh, it's all like random if it's like that. But no, it's not really random either. And so that's kind of one of the big pragmatist ideas, is that it's order out of variation or out of chance.
And then I guess I got a question for you. So it's not really like these 3 laws aren't necessarily the only 3 laws or whatever, but Do you think that if we found and say like we were going for like reduction, like we were like trying to reduce as much of our theories of the world and everything, our philosophies, our math and everything to a grand unified theory, do you think that we could like unify it all down to like the most basic data points, like with dots or something, or numbers, or we could express our beliefs or concepts that way? And do you think there's like a simplest explanation of the universe that way? Would you think that that's cognitively imaginable?
I think just the mere fact that it's imaginable is what motivates a lot of people to think in the first place, right? So it almost doesn't matter too much. But what James said that especially towards the end of his life, he was very interested in the ideas of monism and pluralism. So he was like monistic philosophers, very much, even if they think of themselves as materialistic or atheistic or something like that, very much want like one way of describing everything or one grand unified theory, right? And he says that's okay. It's okay to kind of point in that direction, and if we don't, we would just die, basically. Or like if you have all this like data flowing into your body or flowing into your senses and your consciousness, and you didn't sort it somehow, you basically couldn't live. And that's one of the main functions of your brain, is to unify things. Say, oh, all of these things are books. So in my head, I've got books right here, instead of just white, blue, yellow, just like attacking me. And I actually turn it into books. And the fact that I categorize things that way changes the way I interact with them, and then the knowledge that I get out of them, the further knowledge. So if I don't classify, I actually lose knowledge. And so he would say that the unifying impulse is there and is very natural, but to expect it to be unified, or that if you don't actually reach that unification, it's all null, is also false. So, and I think maybe a more, I don't know if you'd call it more religious, but part of the idea is that the second coming of Christ essentially means the revelation of everything. Or because the word apocalypse doesn't mean like bad thing happening, actually. It means the revealing. So when you say so the book of Revelation is where you get Christian end of the world imagery a lot of the time. But sometimes they call it the apocalypse of John, which means the revelation of John. Right? Yeah. So that's what the word revelation means. Oh, it's revealed to me what all the truth is. And that kind of happens at the end. And that everyone that participates in it participates in the full revelation at the end, even if they don't have it on earth now.
So as a Christian man who believes in the revelation, do you think that at some point, like God or Jesus will come down and you will actually be revealed all the truths?
Well, depends if you mean point like on earth here, right? I don't even know what I'd say about that.
Yeah, like do you think Jesus will come down and tell you like here's the correct theory of relativity? Like,
it wouldn't be like that.
Okay,
I doubt it. Like if you read Revelation, it's like a battle is happening and all this stuff. So it's really crazy stuff. He wouldn't be like a professor, be like, here's finally the true book.
Yeah. That would be my version of heaven. If somebody came down and just told me all the truths, I'd be like, yeah.
But the fact that that's your version of heaven is probably like also a little bit instructive, because it's a little bit more like, this is where I am and this is where I would see things going. So
cool.
Yeah, cool.
Dude, we should talk sometime about metaphysics or something soon. We should
let's do that. Maybe if I read some of these Peirce essays, I'll send you some of the Peirce essays, and maybe we can talk about them.
I'd be interested in that.
That would be really fun. Yeah. But read a little bit about Peirce's personal history, because he's a crazy guy.
He's actually like legitimately patently.
I think he did cocaine.
He did. Oh, really? A Freudian guy.
Yeah, but he was a Christian, kind of. He was Episcopalian.
And that's like a light Christian, right? Like a Christian light.
Well, back then it wouldn't have been particularly, but that's their association now, is that they're more liberal and much looser with their doctrines and stuff like that, which I'm not going to say is wrong necessarily, but
yeah.
I think it's wrong, but I'm not going to say like they're so Christian. Yeah.
And you're like an Orthodox now, or you're?
No, I'm just interested in Orthodoxy a lot, but I'm not. That's one of the things I like about it, is that you don't get to just say, oh, I'm interested, so I'm this now. Like, there's a pretty solid line of when you know that you've actually made a commitment. You know?
Yeah. And so you are just like a non-denominational Christian?
Yeah, I guess, but almost like non-denominational, like has almost a particular meaning, that you go to a kind of church that's part of this other kind of, more like the evangelical movement, which I grew up in more. But if anything, I'm less of that now.
I see that. I respect that.
Do you know David Bentley Hart?
I can't. No, I don't know.
I don't. I definitely. He would be he's not. He doesn't call himself a theologian. He's a religious scholar, but he's more philosophical. He talks about philosophy all the time. So he's one that non-Christian philosophers would probably know a little bit better. But I don't agree with him all the time. He wrote a book recently on universal salvation, on how everybody is saved.
Interesting.
Which is a maybe for me.
Yeah, you don't think? Yeah,
it's a maybe. It's a maybe.
If I was a Christian, I probably wouldn't believe that like child murderers are going to heaven or whatever. I wouldn't believe that.
Yeah. Or maybe the way that Bentley Hart would phrase it is that a really small part of them is going to heaven.
Oh, so we get
like their toes are going to heaven. Yeah, almost like part of you goes, part of you doesn't.
That's a lot of personal identity issues there with metaphysics that you could bring up with Peter Van Inwagen or something.
Oh, cool. Well, yeah, we could talk about that too. Yeah. Okay. Well, this has been pretty good. So, thanks for coming on, Puggy, and maybe we'll try to do it again. I think that'd be fun.
Thanks for having me on, Marcus. I really respect you.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks.
See you.